Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.
It's great to be back.
So today we're kind of staring into the abyss. We're tackling that ultimate existential crisis that humanity just can't seem to shake.
The big one.
The big one. You know, that obsession with truth, the afterlife, the whole what comes next dilemma. It covers everyone from people who are all in on gods and divine intervention to those who believe in reincarnation, all the way to the skeptics who are just convinced the grave is the end of the road.
And nobody actually knows for sure.
No one. But the quest to figure it out is, it's older than history itself.
And that quest usually brings us to two very specific words. Words that people use all the time, often incorrectly and sometimes, frankly, as weapons in a debate.
Right. Atheist and agnostic. So today we're going to try and untangle these. Are they the same thing? Are they total opposites? Or do they exist on some kind of, strange sliding scale where you can actually be both?
We're going to break down the definitions, look at a really fascinating spectrum of belief that was developed by Richard Dawkins, and see where some of the world's most famous minds actually fit into the puzzle.
It is a big puzzle. And actually, before we dive into all the complex arguments and the definitions, just a quick thing. If you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. It really helps us keep these deep dives coming.
Okay, so let's set the stage. Why is this so confusing for people in the first place?
I think it's because the labels themselves, they just feel like they carry so much baggage. You say atheist, and some people hear intellectual, but others hear immoral.
Right.
You say agnostic, and some hear open-minded, while others hear indecisive.
Precisely. And to clear all that up, we have to start with the basics, the definitions. Let's start with atheism.
Okay, so on the surface, it seems simple enough. Our sources define it broadly as, the unbelief in a god or the belief that there is no god. But here's the thing that always gets me, and apparently it gets a lot of atheists too. Why do we even need a word for not believing in something?
You're talking about the non-astrologer analogy from our research.
Exactly. It's such a great argument. I don't believe in astrology. I think it's complete nonsense that the position of Mars determines if I'm going to have a bad day.
Me too.
But I don't go around introducing myself as a non-astrologer. We don't have a word for people who don't believe in, like, the tooth fairy or Bigfoot. It's just the default.
It's a very strong point. And the only reason the word atheist even exists is because theism, the belief in a god, is the dominant cultural norm. If everyone were an atheist, the word wouldn't be necessary.
So it's a reaction, basically.
It is. Because religion has such a massive footprint on history, on law, on culture, the act of not believing needs its own label.
It's almost like a defensive posture. You have to identify yourself as not that.
And recently, that identity has become much, much louder. You've got the new atheist movement with figures like Richard Dawkins, Ricky Gervais. They aren't just quietly disbelieving. They are very vocal critics of religion.
But even within that group, we have to make a really important distinction that the sources point out.
Yes. The difference between I don't believe and I know there isn't.
Right. That's the split between Gnostic atheism and agnostic atheism.
Which sounds confusing, I know, because it mashes our two main words together.
It does.
But think of it this way. A Gnostic atheist is a hardliner. They claim to know, that's the Gnostic part, that there is no God. They believe they can actually prove the negative.
That seems like a tough position to defend scientifically. Proving a negative is famously difficult.
It is, which is why many modern thinkers would actually identify as agnostic atheists. They'll say, look, I can't prove there is no God with 100% certainty, but I think it's highly, highly unlikely, so I live my life as if there isn't one.
Okay, so that leads us perfectly into the other big term, agnosticism. If the agnostic atheist admits they don't know for sure, is that all agnosticism is? Just saying, I don't know.
Well, literally, yes. The etymology is Greek. Gnosis means to know.
Right.
And a is the prefix for without, so without knowledge. But the origin of the word is actually fascinating. It wasn't just, floating around forever. It was invented for a specific reason in the 19th century.
This was Thomas Henry Huxley, the biologist.
That's the one. In 1876. You have to remember, this was a time when Darwin's theory of evolution was just shaking the absolute foundations of religious society. Huxley was at a meeting of the Metaphysical Society, which was basically a club where all the smartest religious and secular minds got together to argue about the universe.
I can't even imagine the tension in that room.
And Huxley felt trapped. The religious people claimed they knew God existed. The hardline atheists claimed they knew God didn't exist. So Huxley looked at both sides and said, You are all claiming to know things you cannot possibly know.
So he didn't coin agnosticism as a belief, but as a scientific standard.
Exactly. His whole definition was that a person should not say they know or believe something if they have no scientific grounds for it. His stance was that we are trapped in the physical world, limited by our senses, and therefore the divine or the supernatural is simply beyond our reach.
See, and this is where agnostics get so much heat. People, especially the hardliners on both sides, they look at them and say, oh, you're just sitting on the fence. You're too scared to pick a team.
And Huxley would argue that it takes more courage to admit your own ignorance than to fake certainty. It's not about being indecisive. It's a firm, rigorous position that says the data is insufficient.
So an atheist says there is no God. An agnostic says we don't have the tools to answer that question.
In a nutshell, yes. But human belief is rarely that black and white. You don't just flip a switch.
And this is the part of the research I found most useful. Richard Dawkins, in his book, The God Delusion, lays out a spectrum. He argues there are 7 levels of belief.
The Dawkins spectrum. It's a fantastic tool because it allows for all that nuance we're talking about.
Okay, let's walk through these 7 levels. And for everyone listening, try and place yourself somewhere on this ladder as we go. We start at the top, level 1.
Level 1 is the strong theist. This is 100% probability, absolute certainty. Dawkins quotes the psychologist C.G. Jung, who famously said, "I do not believe, I know."
So for this person, God is as real as the chair they're sitting in, no doubt at all.
Zero doubt. Then you step down to level 2, the de facto theist. This is a very high probability, but just short of 100%. They might say, I can't know for certain, but I strongly believe in God, and I live my life on the assumption he is there. It's a practical belief.
And level 3 is leaning towards theism.
Higher than 50%. They're uncertain, but if you force them to bet, they'd bet on God. They're inclined to believe, maybe from upbringing or just a feeling.
And then we hit the dead center, level 4, completely impartial, the exact 50-50 mark.
This is the pure agnostic position in theory. God's existence and non-existence are exactly equally probable.
Is that even possible, though? I feel like level 4 is this perfect intellectual ideal, but in reality, don't we all lean just a little bit one way or the other?
It's very, very hard to stay at level 4. Most people drift, which takes us down to level 5, leaning towards atheism.
So lower than 50%.
Right. I don't know, but I'm inclined to be skeptical.
And then level 6, this is the de facto atheist.
This is the mirror image of level 2. I don't know for certain, but I think God is very improbable, and I live my life on the assumption he is not there.
And finally, we hit the bottom. Level 7, the strong atheist.
The counterpart to level 1, the person who says, I know there is no God.
What's so interesting to me about this is that society tends to just group everyone into level 1 or level 7. You're either a hardcore believer or a hardcore atheist.
Exactly.
But most of us are probably somewhere in the middle. The 2s and the 6s, maybe.
That is Dawkins' entire point. He actually identifies himself as a level 6, leaning towards 7. He says level 7 is almost as unscientific as level 1 because you're claiming absolute knowledge about a universe we just don't fully understand.
To say, I know there is no God, requires proof that you can't provide.
Precisely. So that agnostic atheist we talked about earlier,
That's a level 6.
that's your level 6. You live without God, but you keep the door cracked open just a tiny bit for the possibility that you might be wrong.
Okay, this is making a lot more sense. We have the definitions, we have the spectrum. So now let's get into the nitty-gritty comparison. The source material has a list of key differences, and I want to just throw these at you, rapid fire.
Let's do it.
First up, belief versus knowledge.
This is the fundamental divide. Atheism is about belief. Do you believe? No. Agnosticism is a theory of knowledge. No. One answers a question of faith, the other answers a question of science.
Okay. What about what they call the proof paradox?
An atheist often looks at the lack of proof for God and sees that as evidence of absence. I don't see him, so he's not there. An agnostic says proof is impossible to get in this dimension, so the lack of proof doesn't mean anything other than we're blind.
That's a huge distinction. One sees an empty room, the other just says the lights are off.
Exactly.
What about the afterlife? This is where the rubber meets the road for most people.
For a strict atheist, the answer is usually pretty blunt. Biological death is the end. Lights out. No greater purpose. For an agnostic, because they admit they don't know the true nature of reality, they have to admit an afterlife is technically possible.
Unlikely, maybe.
Very unlikely, perhaps, but possible. That technicality offers a lot of comfort to people, I think. It leaves room for mystery.
Which leads to the friction between the two groups. They criticize each other pretty heavily, don't they?
Oh, constantly. Atheists often look at agnostics and see cowardice. They'll say, you're just afraid to admit there's no God because it's scary.
And the other way around.
Agnostics look at atheists and see arrogance. They say, you're making these absolute claims about the universe that you just can't back up with data.
But going back to our overlap rule, the logic says you can be both.
Yes, but only in one direction. You can be an agnostic atheist, that's our level 6 person.
Yes.
But you cannot be an agnostic strong atheist, a level 7.
Why not?
Because if you claim you know there is no God, you have, by definition, abandoned agnosticism. You can't say, I don't know and I know in the same breath.
Right, got it. Okay, let's shift gears a bit to how this all looks in the real world. Philosophy is great, but seeing how people actually navigate this is better. We've got some celebrity case studies.
It's always helpful to apply these labels to real lives.
Let's start with Daniel Radcliffe, Harry Potter.
Radcliffe is interesting. He really represents the political side of atheism. He said he becomes militant when religion starts to impact legislation.
So for him, it's not just a personal lack of belief. It's a reaction to organized religion trying to force its rules on the rest of society.
Which is a very common path. A lot of people become atheists not because they've studied cosmology, but because they fundamentally disagree with the politics of the church.
Then you have someone like Brad Pitt. He gave a breakdown that I think perfectly illustrates the spectrum we just talked about. He said, I'm 20% atheist and 80% agnostic.
I love that quote. It's so honest. It's basically him saying, look, I mostly just admit, I don't know, that's the 80%, but there is a part of me, the 20%, that really suspects it's all just made up.
It maps perfectly onto a level 5 or maybe a level 6 on that Dawkins scale. He's skeptical, but he's not slamming the door shut.
And then, of course, we have the heavy hitter, Albert Einstein. Both sides are desperate to claim him. Religious people love quoting him, and atheists love quoting him.
It's so true. On the one hand, you have him saying things like, I want to know how God created this world. I want to know his thoughts. That sounds like a level 1 or 2 believer.
It does. But then you have to look at his other writings, his letters, where he says things like, I do not believe in immortality of the individual, and I consider ethics to be an exclusively human concern with no superhuman authority behind it.
So he wants to know God's thoughts, but he doesn't think God cares about us.
This is the key to understanding Einstein, and honestly, a lot of high-level scientists. When Einstein used the word God, he wasn't talking about a bearded man in the sky who listens to prayers. He was talking about Spinoza's God.
Spinoza's God.
Baruch Spinoza, a philosopher. He basically defined God as the universe itself, the laws of physics, the harmony of nature, the mathematical elegance of existence. Einstein was in awe of the system.
So when he said, I want to know God's thoughts, he meant, I want to understand the laws of physics.
Precisely. He was what you might call a religious non-believer, deeply spiritual in his awe for the cosmos,
Yeah.
but technically an atheist when it comes to a personal creator God. He just defies the simple labels.
And I think that's really the ultimate takeaway here. These labels, atheist, agnostic, level 4, level 6, they're just tools. They aren't boxes you have to stay in for your whole life.
Right. You might be a level 2 today, and then after some personal tragedy or a new scientific discovery, you might slide all the way to a level 6, or the other way around.
So, to synthesize all this, atheism is your position on the existence of a God. Agnosticism is your position on what is knowable, what's provable.
You can be a Gnostic atheist who is absolutely sure. You can be an agnostic theist who believes but admits they can't prove it. Or you can be like Einstein, just staring at the universe in complete wonder and not really worrying about the label.
I just want to ask you, the listener, to reflect on that Dawkins spectrum again. Where do you think you land? Are you a comfortable level 4, a conflicted 6, a certain 7?
And as we close, I want to leave everyone with a final thought from our source material. It kind of challenges the very premise of this whole debate.
Let's hear it.
Do you think humanity can ever actually prove the existence or non-existence of a God? Or are we, just by our biological nature, destined to stay in this realm of not knowing? Is agnosticism not just a choice, but the permanent condition of being human?
A very humbling thought to end on. We might just have to get comfortable with the mystery. Thanks for thinking deeper with us today.
See you next time.